सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The already quite deep and wide polarization between the pro-Israeli world, anti-Israeli world, or critics of Israel, or you might say between the Jewish world or Zionist world and those opposed to it, has been deepened and widened because of the new conflict which has broken out after the attacks by Hamas and then Israel's strikes on Gaza. Gaza is the home of Hamas. This has divided the world on completely expected lines. But some of its fallout has been quite unexpected. For example, in the newsroom of one of the most respected newspapers in the world, The Guardian. Now, The Guardian is among the most respected newspapers in the world. It's also positioned left of center, quite unapologetically and quite firmly and quite unwaveringly left of center. You like it, you don't like it, you agree with it strongly, you disagree with it, you disagree with it strongly. But one thing you can be sure of is that while staying close to its ideological position, The Guardian does top class journalism. That's why for The Guardian to fire their columnist, and this is not just any columnist. This is Steve Bell. Steve Bell is among the foremost columnists in the Anglosphere, in the English-speaking world, in the media. He's been the columnist with The Guardian, political columnist, for more than 40 years now. So he's been fired for drawing this cartoon. Now you can see this cartoon. This is the cartoon which The Guardian found unpublishable and found anti-Semitic and fired him. Now, he has been in trouble before, similarly on charges of being anti-Semitic. So, some of his cartoons have been published in the past. You can see a couple of examples as I am speaking with you on your screen. There's one, for example, featuring the chairman of BBC and Boris Johnson, who was then Prime Minister. Boris Johnson is shitting on a pile of garbage, right? And there's a lot of Jewish imagery used there. Goldman Sachs, for example. There have been some others. Some have been used, some have not been used. So in fact, lately, Steve Bell, the cartoonist, has been complaining that he's never been asked to submit drafts of his cartoons for clearance. But now he's having to do it. He doesn't like it. This questioning has come only on the question of anti-Semitism. So we talk about what's happened in this case and also a little bit, and through this we also try to understand what anti-Semitism is, what its history is, and what lies at the root of today's Arab-Israeli conflict. We don't have that much time. That would require an entire semester, if not more, but we'll try and do as much as we can in about 20 minutes or so, 20 to 25 minutes that we get for Cut the Clutter. Now, this cartoon, the offending cartoon, because of which Steve Bell has been fired, see the cartoon. This cartoon has Benjamin Netanyahu performing surgery on his belly. He's performing surgery on his belly, and the cut he's making is cut that looks like the Gaza Strip. It's exactly the map of Gaza. So you might say, all right, this is a bit nasty, but how is it anti-Semitic? Because Gaza is right next to Israeli territory, surrounded by Israel from two sides and the Mediterranean on the other, with a little bit of Egypt on one side. So this sounds a bit crude, but it sounds all right. But that is not the issue. The reason it's been seen as anti-Semitic is because it is seen to be, or it is supposed to be seen to be harking back to the Shylock story. Now, Shylock was the character in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, written in about 1598, 1600, thereabouts. Now, Shylock represented the stereotype of the greedy, usurious, money-minded Jew for whom nothing mattered but money, and who, when his money was not paid, demanded his pound of flesh. He demanded a pound of flesh, a part of the flesh from the borrower who was defaulting on his loan. So the critics of Steve Bell say that, look, he's a serial offender. He's been doing this in the past also. Some of his cartoons have drawn the anti-Semitic charges of being anti-Semitic. Now he's taken it to another level when Jews have suffered so viciously in Israel, and this is insensitive and this is unacceptable. So that is the reason he's been fired. What is Steve Bell's defense? So I will comment to you an article by my old friend and colleague E.P. Unni, India's finest political cartoonist now, and in fact for many years now. He's written this article on the op-ed page of the Indian Express, of which I will share a copy with you, a link with you. You can read that. So if you see E.P. Unni's article, he gives you the context. He also gives you the defense that Steve Bell has. So Steve Bell's defense, it's available all over the British media also. Steve Bell's defense is that, look, I was not thinking of Shylock, Merchant of Venice. I was not drawing that parallel. He says that his inspiration was a cartoon drawn by David Levine, who was a famous and quite sharp American political cartoonist in the 1960s. So David Levine drew a cartoon in the New York Review of Books, and as we talk of these cartoons, you are seeing these on your screen. So see his cartoon also. His cartoon in the New York Review of Books, when Lyndon B. Johnson, then president, in some press conference or some get together with the press, lifted his shirt to show the scar of a gallbladder surgery he had just undergone. Now these days gallbladder surgery usually doesn't leave any scars. It is simply done through a hole laparoscopically, but those days you had to cut open the stomach. It was quite a scar. Now David Levine, the cartoonist then, he was provoked by that picture into drawing a cartoon of Lyndon Johnson, where again he bears his stomach and shows a surgery mark, a surgery scar, but that scar is drawn exactly as the map of Vietnam. That's when Vietnam War was on. So Steve Bell's reasoning is, his argument is that, look, I was inspired. I remember David Levine's cartoon, and he's been a cartoonist for a long time himself, for 40 plus years. So his years would have coincided also with the David Levine, the fame of David Levine's cartoon. So he said, I was harking back to that, not to Shakespeare or Shylock or Shakespeare's portrayal of the Jew, and mine was not an insinuation that Jews are bad people. So I was not anti-Semitic, but obviously, also given his track record, The Guardian did not buy that argument and he was made to go. Now it marks a big shift, a big turning point in the debate when The Guardian fires a cartoonist, a political cartoonist, for anti-Semitism. Now, in the recent past, The Guardian has refused to publish some of Bell's cartoons. One of these, which you will again see on your screen, was about the failed anti-Semitism attack on Jeremy Corbyn when he was the Labour Party leader. This was compared with a witch hunt. Again, this was compared with a witch hunt in this cartoon. Again, The Guardian had refused to publish it. This was published instead in a publication called Socialist Workers, which is most certainly way to the left of The Guardian as well. Now, this is a big change. One, The Guardian doing it, and before that, see the immediate response of the Labour Party. Now, we have to see what The Guardian has done in the light of how the Labour Party, the British Labour Party, has responded to Hamas attacks. Usually, you would have expected Labour Party to say, look, terrible thing that Hamas has done should never have happened. Our sympathies with Israelis, but would then again have brought in the Palestinian question, rights of Palestinians, two-state solution, etc. Because but then brings in the root causes theory. This time, British Labour did no such thing. In fact, anchors from Al Jazeera and BBC I was watching, they pressed the Labour spokesperson again and again on this, and the Labour spokesperson said, look, we'll talk about those things, Palestine, etc. Those will come later, but right now, all we'll say is this was a terror attack. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and that Israel has the right to self-defense. That marks some kind of a shift in the ideological debate vis-a-vis Israel, and it seems, one, it has been sparked by the severity of the Hamas attacks, but it could also be because something like this or some kind of a correction has been brewing for some time in the global political left. This, some people would see as an indication of that. Now, having said this, what exactly is anti-Semitism. We keep hearing that expression all the time. Now, anti-Semitism, there are two ways of understanding this. One is simply Google, go to Wikipedia, you will find lots and lots and lots of reading. I latched onto it last night and it kept me awake through the night because one thing takes you to the other. It also made me read quite a bit of Marx, for example, last night, which I might not have done earlier, having gone to campuses in really small town India where there was no politics, and also having only read botany, zoology, chemistry, at least in my graduation studies. Having said that, lots of PhD theses have been written, lots of books have been written about anti-Semitism and Zionism. So it's not our intention to add one more of these. We've got 20-25 minutes to talk about these issues. Now, one of the easiest readings on what is anti-Semitism actually comes from a Jewish publication, a Jewish website, myjewishlearning.com. It's all factual. There is no propaganda. There is no ideology. I'm quoting facts as stated. You can draw your own interpretation. You can draw your interpretation on the left side, on the right side, or you can stay in the center. Those choices are yours. And this is an article which I will share with you. It's actually an extract from a book titled Semites and Anti-Semites, an inquiry into conflict and prejudice. The author is Bernard Lewis. Now, what he explains to us is that the word Semitism or Semitic or Semite, that comes from the biblical belief that when Noah was traversing the great flood, everybody died, everybody drowned, but Noah and his immediate family. Now, 3 of Noah's sons then became precursors to humankind going ahead. One of them was Shem, S-H-E-M, that's the oldest. Second was Ham, H-A-M, and third was Japheth. Now, Shem, for Shem, Sh. For the Sh sound, there is no equivalent in Greek and Latin. So just as in most parts of Eastern India, Sh will be pronounced as Sa, so Shekhar becomes Sekhar. If I go to many parts of India, similarly Sh becomes Sa. And what was Shem, the oldest son of Noah, became Sem. The theory developed that humankind grew along 3 streams, one coming down from each one of these sons. So the stream that came down from Shem or Sem, that were the people who are called Semites. Now Bernard Lewis quite rightly calls it mythologized ethnology. He said, look, first the Christians accepted this belief, and then to a lesser extent Muslims, and then even the Jews accepted this belief that the ancestors of 3 major racial and linguistic groups in the world are Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Shem is the ancestor of Hebrews and other variants and cognates of Hebrews. Ham is the parent or ancestor of dark-skinned people of Africa, and Japheth was the ancestor of Persians, Greeks, and others who then came to be described as Aryans. That is a very broad brush. So very broad brush, one set of Aryans, one set of Hebrews or Semites, and third set dark-skinned people of Africa. By the 18th century, he says, and he says again there is no clear science to it, but by the 18th century it had come to be believed that Iran and the Sanskritic languages of India, they formed one large block west of China, and the other block, and he again quotes a scholar, August Ludwig Scholzer, from an essay in 1781, and I quote from him, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Euphrates. He says from the Mediterranean Sea to the Euphrates and from Mesopotamia to Arabia, as is known, only one language reigned. The Syrians, Babylonians, Hebrew and Arab were one people, which I might call Semitic. Over time, however, Semitism was seen to be identified more on a religio-cultural basis only with the Jews and Hebrew-speaking people. By the 19th century, it became more pronounced, and some of the more prominent voices of the 19th century Europe, from Wagner, the musician, Richard Wagner, the composer, to Karl Marx, they wrote and spoke stuff that looked like laying the foundations of what is today called anti-Semitism. Jews and anti-Semitism have had a very interesting history, fascinating history, in the sense that what you see today looks like a Jewish-Muslim contest, a Jewish-Muslim conflict. It does look like that, but historically that wasn't quite the case. For centuries, even after the rise of Islam, for centuries after that, Jews actually lived quite safely under Muslim rule. They were not first class citizens, they were second class citizens. They had to pay additional taxes, maybe a version of the jizya, as the Hindus were familiar with in India under several Muslim rulers, not all, but under several Muslim rulers. They had to pay additional taxes, which was a kind of protection money. In some cases, they also had to wear badges identifying themselves. So not a first class citizen's life, not a full citizen's life, but they were not physically harmed. In Europe, on the other hand, from 11th century onwards, Jews have always been persecuted. In every century, you can find some big pogrom against the Jews or the other. For example, 14th century, Europe had the Black Death. Jews were blamed for it because Jews have always been featured in many conspiracy theories. One of those conspiracy theories, for example, is that Jews were responsible for Jesus Christ's crucifixion. The Catholic Church has only given that up in 1965. 1965, that is just about less than 60 years ago. Until then, these myths persisted or they were believed in, and that was one of the reasons why the Jews had such a rough time in Europe. The Christian-Jewish conflict was much more violent than the Muslim-Jewish conflict through the centuries. Muslim-Jewish conflict has become pronounced. The Muslim-Jewish conflict actually has only become a reality in the 20th century. Europe it is which has had these phases of Jew hate. Jew hate, you can call it anti-Semitism, although anti-Semitism is an expression that was invented. It was used for the first time, say, in the late 19th century. It now has a definition. I will read that definition also for you in a minute. But late 19th century, 1894, you might have read about the Alfred Dreyfus affair in France. Alfred Dreyfus was a captain, a Jewish captain from a rich Jewish family in French army. France was the first European country where Jews were accepted as equal citizens. So France is seen as the birthplace of European Jewish emancipation. And yet, he was seen as the prime suspect, as the usual suspect in a big case of treason and espionage for the Germans. Quickly convicted, sent to jail on very poor evidence. Later, it was proven that he was innocent and someone else was guilty. But it was his conviction as a traitor which further fed into the idea that Jews could not be patriots to any nation they lived in. The rise of the 20th century, we know the history of the Nazis. We know the history of the Nazis and the Holocaust. The Nazis believed that Jews are biologically distinct from white Europeans and they possess telltale physical characteristics, including, and I quote, large hooked noses and thick curly hair. That's why the Nazis enacted Nuremberg laws of 1935 to protect their own bloodline and bar Jews from having sex and marriage from Germans, from European Germans, and also from having full citizenship. And finally, that led to the campaign of their extermination and the Holocaust. Now, I told you, I will give you some definition of anti-Semitism. So, I've seen many because different organizations have given their definitions. I'll pick up the one from European Union's European Fundamental Rights Agency. That says, it's a bit long, but I will read it, written by a bureaucrat, I'm sure. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And then it goes on to say, and I quote again, such manifestation could also target the state of Israel conceived as a Jewish collectivity. When we see the rise of political anti-Semitism in Europe in the 19th century, Europe was a home of violent anti-Semitism. Today, instinctively, it's blamed on the Arabs, Muslims from the Middle East or Muslim populations elsewhere, and it's true that Jews are not popular among Muslim countries. There are several Pew surveys in many countries, Muslim countries, that show a very low opinion, very low popularity of the Jews. Usually in the Middle East, it's about 2%, 3%. In most countries, in Turkey, maybe 4%. Even to a place as far in the east as Indonesia, only 9% people have a positive opinion of the Jews. So today it might look like that it's a problem between the Jewish world and the Islamic world. But anti-Semitism, even modern anti-Semitism, took roots in Europe. And among the early texts, among the early writings on this is from Richard Wagner, the great composer. Now, it's possible that he was also attacking some of the rising Jewish composers and competitors of his time, but he wrote something called Das Judentum in der Musik, which is translated into English, Jewishness in Music, where he basically described Jews as corrupt, as being corrupt, immoral, parasites even. And I quote from his writing, according to the present constitution of this world, the Jew in truth is already more than emancipated. He rules and he will rule as long as money remains the power before which all our doings and dealings lose their force. That's what he wrote. Now, if he wrote this, then you might say, all right, Wagner, no wonder Hitler liked listening to Wagner. But here is somebody who you will never identify with Nazism. Wagner, the composer, you might, but Karl Marx, so there is a para from Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote an essay titled On the Jewish Question, and I will read out for you a passage from that article. He says, let us not look for the secret of the Jew in his religion, but let us look for the secret of his religion in the real Jew. What is the secular basis of Judaism? Practical need? Self-interest? What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering. Huckstering is when somebody tries very hard to sell you something. You get all these telecallers. Ye insurance le lo, ye ghar le lo. I'll sell you a cheap plot. I will sell you a low interest loan. I will give you a high interest on your deposit. How irritated do you get? That's a bit like huckstering, when somebody tries to market or sell something in a way that's annoying or irritating. So he says, what is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly god? Money. An organization of society which would abolish the preconditions of huckstering, and therefore the possibility of huckstering would make the Jew impossible. The Jew has emancipated himself in a Jewish manner, not only because he has acquired financial power, but also because through him and also apart from him, money has become a world power, and the practical Jewish spirit has become the practical spirit of the Christian nations. This is not somebody from Hamas writing. This is also not somebody sitting in Qatar saying on writing. This is Karl Marx himself writing in the mid-19th century. And then Karl Marx goes on to say the Jews have emancipated themselves insofar as the Christians have become Jews. Money is the jealous god of Israel, in the face of which no other god may exist. Money degrades all the gods of man and turns them into commodities. The bill of exchange is the real god of the Jew. His god is only an illusory bill of exchange. The dodgy nationality of the Jew is the nationality of the merchant, the man of money in general. Now, Karl Marx wrote this. Many people have then argued in the wake of this that Marx was not attacking the Jews, that Marx himself has actually defended the Jews at some point of time. This was part of Marx's argument with Bruno Boyer. Bruno Boyer was also a philosopher of the same era who was anti-religion, who thought that for human beings to have all their rights, for rights of man to all go to man, all religions has to be abolished, and who believed also in the hierarchy of Abrahamic religions, that Judaism came first, it was the most primitive, then Christianity, and then Islam. So Jews, before they got more evolved, had to all get baptized as Christians first. So Marxist defenders say that he's only answering Bruno Boyer. But if you read all this, you draw your own conclusions. Bernard Lewis, from whose writings we had quoted earlier to explain what Semitism is, he said that Marx's writing is one of the classics of anti-Semitic propaganda. Now, Marx, Shylock. So you see all of the theory work on anti-Semitism is coming from Europe. Now, in conclusion, I will do two things. One, I'll quote you a line from Goebbels. You know who Goebbels was? He was the propaganda minister of the Nazis. He said in 1938, and I quote from him, "The German people is anti-Semitic. It has no desire to have its rights restricted or to be provoked in the future by parasites of the Jewish race." Right? And then I will quote to you something that will really surprise you, because that was said by a prominent Indian leader. And India is a country where Jews have never been persecuted, where there's never been any anti-Semitism. There's been criticism of Israel, particularly on the Indian left. And you see where this is coming from. This is Krishna Menon. Krishna Menon, the former Defense Minister of India, he's delivering a speech in 1965 in Cairo in the context of the pro-Palestinian slogan at that point, which was from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is in the context of the pro-Palestine slogan of that period of the mid-60s, which was from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And Shukairi, who was the founder of PLO, he became famous for calling on the Arabs to throw the Jews into the sea. This was on the eve of the Six-Day War. It was in the context of this slogan that Krishna Menon said in 1965 in his speech in Cairo, and I quote from Krishna Menon's speech from the archives, "It is said that justice has great strength, but I would say that in most cases the voice of force is louder than the voice of justice. Force and Arab unity are the real solution to the problems of Palestine. And finally, I would request you not to say always that you will throw Israel into the sea, because by that you would pollute the sea itself." Now, Krishna Menon was not a Jew hater. Krishna Menon was not a Muslim. He was not an Islamist. What he was, we well know. He was deep pink leftist, if not a true red communist. And that is where he was coming from. Now, I have wondered all this while, from where does the global skepticism or even anger or resentment of Israel comes? And I thought that that's maybe because Israel is such an ally of the Americans, a favorite child of the Americans. But if you read history, America and Israel became allies only in the mid-60s. As Israel came into being, for about 20 years, Americans in fact had barred weapons sales to them, and Israel bought its first weapons from France. Most of the weapons, modern weapons it used in the 1967 Six-Day War were French weapons. So America came in much later, however, but now that I read what Marx said about Jews and also some of the other writings in 19th century, early 20th century Europe, I can see one more source and probably a more direct source of the global left's anger with Israel. This is not rooted in the rights of Arabs or the resentments of the Muslims.